Good morning. Welcome to everyone.
Morning.
Primetime celebrates the learning beyond the classroom of Bethel faculty, students, staff, and it's a collaborative project between the Friends of the BU Library, faculty development, and other offices on campus. If you enjoyed the Primetime programming, please consider becoming a member of the Friends of the Library. More information is available on the library website, where you can also find archived recordings of most Primetime presentations in the BU Digital Library. Join us on Thursday, April 5th at 11:15 with Dr. Chad Hoyt, Associate Professor of Physics and winner of the Faculty Excellence Award for Scholarship, shares student projects from the last decade in his presentation, Light as a Beautiful Tool of Precision. Today we welcome Dr. Seann Dikkers of the Education Department as he explores how a class can operate with students doing different work at the same time and shares how he's been playing with approaches to fully differentiated learning for nearly 20 years. Let's welcome Seann.
I have one other person to introduce, and that's Daniel. Daniel Weinhagen is a student in my class right now, and when I talked to the class and said, is anyone interested in sharing a student perspective on this, we thought it'd be a nice addition to the talk today. So Jay, I'm sorry we didn't get you that memo, but Daniel's going to be helping you present today. Anything you want to introduce yourself?
No, that covers it.
All right. So thank you for coming. I hope you enjoy kind of this walk through. Our goals today is to not only introduce you to quest-based learning or differentiated learning in the classroom, but also give you some sense of where that fits within the field and what that looks like. Essentially, hopefully you leave here today with a general sense of how this works. And to do that, we're going to give you a little context. We're going to have you do a short activity. Those of you that are in my class already, this activity will seem kind of basic. But we're looking specifically within a field where they're looking at design, and design specifically that comes from mass market entertainment, massive games that are being played by millions of students across the world. And this talk is really focused in on this idea of what does a classroom look like if it becomes more playful, and how will learning look in that kind of sense. Essentially for me, this comes out of a history where we've tried to make changes in education, and we've been working on this for 100 plus years. And the end result is we really haven't made any essential changes in education. Education still looks largely the same. The only difference that you see between these two pictures is that the technology has changed. And the ways in which we use this kind of technology, papers, books, pencils, which are technologies, they are innovations that changed education. But we have digital tools that are walking into our classrooms that make those classrooms have a lot more potential than they used to. So one of the questions I've had as a researcher and as a scholar is how are those devices getting used in different kinds of ways in the classroom, or how might they essentially change our classrooms? Essentially, I'm not alone. We're starting to see research that's come out over the last 15, 20 years that looks at design in the classroom, or classroom-based design, the use of media in the classroom, the use of games in the classroom, and the use of simulations in the classroom as more playful spaces to learn in. And essentially, we're seeing that those findings are kind of consistent across the board. The question is, how do classrooms start to look more like this? This is Quest to Learn, which is a public school in New York that bases its entire program around quests. And students come to school every day and they choose a quest, they carry out a quest, and they move forward on it, which natively changes the role of the teacher into somebody who's supporting students that are trying to get things done, versus a teacher saying, here's what I want you to get done, and let me show you how I want to see it happen.
So the entertainment industry is capturing a lot of young adults and teenagers, and the basis behind the games are these quests. There is a why, a what, and you have to choose whether to do it or not.
Millions of players. So when we look at this, and when I look at this kind of environment, according to the Pew American Family Life survey, they figure that 97% of American youth are playing some sort of video game on a weekly basis. This is the language or the discourse of today's generation, which may not be the same as my generation. And when we look at these kinds of things, we see massive numbers of students playing these. These are complex games, and they're really different than the games that were around when I was a kid. When arcade games were first coming out, we think of games like Pac-Man and Donkey Kong, and games that were simple Twitch games. These games are a little different than that.
Yeah, so this is a master screen of someone who's been playing for years. This is not what it's going to look like for someone who just started playing. The people that look like this probably are semi-professional, if not professional at the game, streaming all day long.
This is a game called World of Warcraft for those non-gamers in the room. What I like about this, when it comes to the learning curve that has to happen before someone can enter this kind of space. If you want to play this game, you actually have to get good at it. One of the favorite things that teenagers will do is invite their parent or an adult to try a game out, and they'll put you in at this level. And then for the grown-up, it's extremely frustrating. You don't know what to do, and you feel like tossing the controller. And then the teenagers laugh at you because they think it's really funny. Essentially, the learning that has to happen between day one of a game, and this is probably 200-300 hours into gameplay, is that you have to kind of invest yourself in something. You have to make a choice. This is Rochester Institute of Technology used near-field identification devices to create quests throughout their entire university program. What they did is they looked at the research of these are the things that make for successful college students. Among those things, they picked 120 items. One of them is, if a student visits a professor's classroom, they're more likely to graduate. So simple correlations. And they took those simple correlations and they simply told their freshmen, these are the things we think you should do. These are your quests. So find the secret passage connecting these buildings. Go out to eat with 10 or more friends. Go meet with a professor in their office. Ask a question in class, sit in the front row. All of these kinds of things that added up to be more likely to be successful students. So they simply made these games throughout their program. I'm interested, of course, in the social aspects of gaming, not the competitive parts. In a classroom, I want a team. And what does it look like when a team of people start to work together towards a common goal, and how do we build that in classrooms, and how do we structure it? I started playing with this early on using mobile games. And those people that are in my pedagogy class know that we had people designing mobile games for the classroom use, where you can start to play these. There's a couple books over here on that topic, where we started to find that if we gave teachers editors to make their own games, the teachers by the thousands would start to use those editors to make games for their classroom. And this is across subject areas. One of the things that's interesting for me is when you find a subject area where you wouldn't think a mobile game would be a good fit, and you put that in the hands of a future teacher, they easily imagine where that might fit in their classroom. For instance, Keegan Feller and Mackenzie Henson started making mobile games that would take you on a tour of Mozart's life or the Beatles and how they moved around the planet, and you can start to see the history behind some of the musical groups and bands and design and musicians that they were studying in their classroom. I'm also interested in how this can be relevant in the classroom. What kinds of simulations and activities might actually add knowledge that we see as relevant versus killing orcs in World of Warcraft, right? The problem with those video games is that they're not particularly relevant in the real world, but there are also games using the exact same technology that actually have skills in them that are relevant to the world.
So what if the classroom could look like this and just be one big game? Or like this, where your hands on.
That's my favorite one because it always gets that reaction. Essentially, the question comes down to, and here's the problem, with thousands of simulations and interactives and even mobile games we can design ourselves and things we can do, how do you make those choices and how do you make those happen? And even here at Bethel, some of those things have been really kind of a challenge because I don't know if we have the systems in place to always do that. So what if I want to put a game like World of Warcraft on these computers right over here? The problem is with weekly updates, our system will block some of those updates out, and it becomes a management nightmare for the librarians. So essentially, how do I use those little laptops that are already coming into my classroom where students can do their own maintenance on some of these products that might be interesting? Furthermore, if students learn differently and they have different learning styles, and there's multiple ways to learn it, and there's multiple students in my classroom every semester, that group changes, this becomes a design nightmare, right? The multipliers keep adding up. So I want to simplify it really quickly before we dig into the how-to of this. There's a little table right back there by Bob. It has 3 pieces of paper on it. I'd like you to actually stand up and grab one of those 3 pieces of paper based on this question. This weekend, let's imagine, you have an assignment for me in my class. Dean's already grabbed it. If you have an assignment for me in the class, you have to make a decision about how you're going to do it for me. Let's differentiate really easily, and this is low-level differentiation. You can make me a video and show me that you know this knowledge, You can write me a paper and show me that you know this knowledge, or you can prepare me a lesson and actually have a lesson that you teach in my classroom. Go ahead and make your choice. There's 3 colors on the table back there. Grab a slip of paper, come back to your seat, and we'll take a look. All right, are we good?
So how many of you would have made the video if you can just hold your cards up? Written the paper? And prepared a lesson? It's kind of 50-50 between the paper and lesson.
Which one's the most common when you come to Bethel University?
The paper.
The paper. Everybody hold your cards up nice and high so we can see them. And professors in the room, I want you to look around and see that differentiation isn't something that I had to do as a prof. What I essentially had to do is offer choice. Biblically speaking, thank you very much. Biblically speaking, this is kind of interesting because I think one of the first things that God did with humanity is gave them a choice. When as teachers we don't give our students choices, I would venture to say we're taking away a little piece of humanity from our students when they don't get to choose. When you do get to choose, you'll notice that instantly we have variety in the classroom, doing basically for me as a prof, any of these 3 work. In fact, grading 60 papers sounds like a Saturday, but grading 20 of these, 20 of those, and 20 of those differentiates my grading time. It actually makes grading more interesting because people can show me their best work, not the work that they're obligated to do. Let me ask you one more question. When you got up to go over and grab that piece of paper, did you imagine yourself doing some sort of work, even without me giving you a topic? Did you think, what am I good at and what are my skills? To me, that's the humanity in education. When you do that, when you make that choice right up front, there's a certain humanity that has to happen. You have to consider things and you have to weigh things out. In gaming, they actually have a word for this. It's called min-maxing. How do I get the maximum level of results with the minimum amount of energy, right? How do I do the best work I can for something that I think will be easier to do? And to me, that's a really interesting phenomenon. Why does that happen? How do we think that way? Why do we work that way as human beings? So I'm going to get into the nuts and bolts, and I'm going to say it this way to start off with. Most of my experimentation over 20 years has been failing, but it's been failing wonderfully. And I love this. And I love that at Bethel there's a community of other faculty that like this idea of innovation and trying things and seeing how they work or they don't. So here's my first experiment with a group of 7th grade students in a history classroom where we gave them roles: scribe, cartographer, scholar, author, scientist, adventurer, and artist. And this had 2 design principles. One, I want them to have the choice that you just had. How you show me you learned American history around this idea of exploration and discovery, that's up to you. I'll let you choose how you want to do it. And this is a horrible design because I have to, as a teacher, keep track of how many experience points every one of these is worth, and they all have different numbers. And it became this logistical nightmare to try to figure it out as a teacher. I also had these set bonuses, which are in computer games too. If you collect all parts of this set, you get extra XP, which forced students into picking a role of some sort or another, which brings role play into my classroom. Oddly enough, I had great numbers of students all over the map on here. So even with that simple design principle and what a mess this was for me as a teacher, the results were phenomenal. And students started to say things like, well, first of all, I had my A+ students that had always been successful in schools that got frustrated with this. What do you mean you want me to think? I don't want to make choices. Tell me the 10 things you need me to learn and I will memorize them and I'll kick them back on a test. It's an extremely frustrating experience for those kinds of students when you don't structure it. But that got me asking as a teacher, what are we doing to students when we don't make them think? And then they get into life and they're crippled because they can't make these key decisions about what's worth their time and what's not worth their time, right? Another one I got was these other type A students, actually not type A, A+ students, that said, oh, instead of making a choice, I'll do everything. And they would go home and spend 8, 9, 10, 12 hours on a Saturday trying to get blackout on the options. And it was insane. I got parent phone calls that were from, why is my student doing all this homework? And I'm just saying they don't have to do that homework. They're just excited to do it. And if each of these little pieces are actually kind of exciting and a little bit fun, and I think students will play with you on that, and the students that are in my class, they know they're in a psychology class, right? So they know they have to do work for that class. So we're going to suspend that fun word a little bit to say this is as fun as it gets when I have to learn these things. But if we can make that as enjoyable as possible, it's kind of wonderful. Third thing I used to get was, would this count? And even with a wonderful failure, this is the wonderful part, I would see students going, well, wait a second. And these were students that generally were C, B students that would start to say, if these ideas are all okay, what if I did this with that material we're learning in class? And they would start to come into me as a teacher and now me as a professor and say, could I do this? And would that count? And the answer usually is, because they put all this thought into it, usually the answer is, yeah, that would be an outstanding addition to the class. Anything to add to that? So how do we value work in the classroom? And what does value look like? So if work in the classroom is simply reading a book, writing a paper about it, and then taking a test, that's one model of learning, and it's an effective model of learning. We've been doing it for hundreds of years. It works wonderfully. But it doesn't fully leverage some of these digital resources and tools that are also out there. So I started to think about, and this is another wonderful failure, I started to think about how we create activities that look a little more like the Rochester Institute of Technology, these things that I value, but I don't grade. So is it of value for a human being to be able to make another human being laugh? Does that have value in the workplace? Is it something we want to see for character development? Is it something we want to see collegially? Do we want to see people praising each other, not competing with each other? But is there a way where we can create systems where naturally students will recognize that other people's work is really pretty amazing? So if you picked that quest and I picked this quest and Daniel picked another quest, what does it look like if we've all picked these quests, but when Daniel does his, I'm super impressed because I tried that one and that one seemed really impossible to me and he made it look easy. So part of differentiation is this idea of praise. And there's a ton of other ones where we really started to consider how do we do these things in a classroom where we can do that? Is the goal to turn in work or is the goal to constantly be revising? And if I want to develop writers in my classroom, there needs to be an assumption that we're always revising things. It's never finished. So what does it look like when we have units in our class that never end? And in that, I even changed the semiotics around that. I don't call them units anymore, I call them layers. So yeah, we're done with layer one, but if you see something going on during this semester, the rest of the semester, you can keep adding experience points to that layer one that we just got done with. So tell me what you're doing, and that basically means we're in a work relationship with colleagues, and I'm tracking what 30 people are doing in my classroom.
So what if the classroom could look like this, where we have things we need to do and different ways that we can do them? So Dikkers created this, and so this is layer 2 in the Ed Psych class, where we have to learn the theories for behaviorism, constructivism, taxonomy, but there are multiple different ways we can do it. So all filled in, there we go. All filled in, it's going to look something like this. So we have a bunch of different things we can do. We can play a game, we can just do the reading, or go out in the field, make a video. So if you click on one of those, you're going to see something pop up similar to this, where you have why we're doing it, what you have to do, and then you have to choose whether to do it or not. So I've spent so much time reading through these quest cards and saying, I don't want to do them, but then finding one that I finally do want to do. So you can connect this. This is one of the cards from the class, and you have the why, the what, and then you have to choose whether you're going to accept to do it. So the importance of that is you have to make all the connections to the readings and to what we're learning in class. It's very application-based versus just busy work.
So when students hand in a quest, generally speaking, they need to tell me what row they're working in, and they need to provide some sort of evidence, which can be really different, a lot like the little cards you just picked out. The evidence or how you show me you know it is really different. In some ways, this looks like outcome-based education. They have to reflect or use the language, the discourse from the class, and as they're reading all these quest cards, so if they're doing constructivism, they're actually reading 5 different quest cards. That actually, if they're about a half page a piece for the quest cards, they're actually reading 2.5 pages worth of constructivism before they even make their choice. Yeah. And if you look at the entire piece, this all happens on day 1 of a unit. So the first thing students do when they come into a new layer in the class is they start clicking on these and reading all the quest cards. In total, you know, if you add this up at about a half page apiece, we're dealing with about 12 to 13 pages of reading before we even start our work in the class. But that doesn't necessarily feel like work when I talk to Daniel.
No, so I got curious and asked students what they think of quests, and so I put it together in a little video.
Quest-based learning has been influential in my time in psych because, I don't know, you feel like a personal sense of achievement when you get to choose your own path and when you get to focus on what interests you. At first it kind of seemed like it was just going to be busy work, but I found by the time I was turning in my portfolio, I was really proud of the work I had done. I was very skeptical of quest-based learning when I started the course, just because I'm much more of a student who likes having lectures and being able to just have a test and get that out of the way or just read. But I actually get a lot of benefit out of doing the class just because then you get to personalize your learning and learn what you want.
What I like about quest-based learning is that it's a different way to approach each individual student's needs, and for each individual different learners, they all learn differently, and so when you have specific quests that help you excel in some areas, it helps you excel in what you're learning, and the information that's being taught is being taught in a way that you can understand.
Once I get to choose what I want to work on, what I want to focus on. If I'm having a really cramped schedule, I don't have to take on a huge project. I can take on just a really small, easy quest, or something that's small and easy to pursue.
Quest-based learning for me is an opportunity to explore different things that I'm interested in. Unlike traditional style learning, where you're forced to do this assignment or this assignment to receive your credit, there are different opportunities, a plethora of different things you can do.
I have really enjoyed working with quest-based learning. It has given me an opportunity to get passionate about the things that I'm studying about and implement my own interests and pursue the interests that I find as I study. And it gives me an opportunity to expand my knowledge in ways that I really enjoy, and it makes me feel like I'm spending my time in ways that are really valuable to me and what I'm going to be doing.
So for me, quest-based learning has been awesome. So I have ADHD, and this is allowing me to do activities that I want to do and things that I can focus on and work all the way through, as opposed to just sitting down and trying to write a paper.
And I think the students brought up a lot of the sorts of things you want to see. You want to see people getting passionate about your subject area. You want to see them making those key choices on their own. You want to see students that embrace it. And the language and even the discourse here was, it was my learning and this is what I want to do. I think it was interesting that sometimes you run into students that in their head they've created a different kind of world. Like the one student that said, there's these kinds of classes that have lectures. We still have lectures in this class, but there's shorter kinds of lectures that allow for more time for some other things. And I want to show you a little bit about how assessment would work in this, because those of you that are professors see 30 different assignments and it looks like nightmare land. So before we jump in that deep end, I want to just say that for me this has been a longer journey, but this class that we're working with right now is about 3 years. The first year we taught it, we added 2 or 3 options for each of those rows, so it builds out over time. Students will come back with options, so at the end of almost every layer when a student writes and says, can I do this and would this count? And I say, yeah, that's actually a wonderful idea. I don't just say that yes to the one student, I actually add it into that quest sheet so that each semester we teach the course, those quest sheets get more and more filled up. And I don't feel obligated to fill every box. But if students see empty boxes, nature loves a vacuum, they try to come up with ideas to fill those boxes. Anything else to add to that? No. All right. So assessment in class, the key question on this one is, if we're already rethinking how to do a class, how do we do a class so that the assessment matches as closely as possible what we see in the field? And I think that at the college level, we've been thinking about that for a very long time. That's not a new question. But the problem is experts don't get grades. And grades become a kind of a design issue in that sense, if we want to just be neutral about it. We need grades. Systemically, I get that we need grades. But they're not highly functional, nor in the workplace do we see grades all of the time. My grade, so to speak, would be more like feedback. So each year we send our letter in. The committee looks at it. I get a nice letter from Barrett that says, here's the things we like, here's the things we don't. So how do I make more time for that in my classrooms? How do I make an environment where we can talk about practice and product in an innovative kind of way? How can I look at a student's product before they turn it in to help give them guidance on what we want to see? So when they turn things in at the end of the unit, they kind of already know what grade they have because we've already had those conversations and those dialogues. I also found something that's just a general rule in education. Those of you that aren't educators, the time you have to grade things will be a direct correlation to the quality of the feedback that you give to students. So if you are short on time or if you have a ton of meetings or things are happening, it gets really hard to give that kind of feedback. So that class time becomes more and more precious because that's minutes on time when I can do sorts of things that I want to do with the students. So for me in general, these are the kinds of things that students would see me doing, and I'll let Daniel kind of talk about what that looks like from the student perspective.
So in class, Dr. Dikkers is constantly walking around. If we're working in groups, he's constantly checking in, listening, and if he hears something that's good, he'll bring it up to the entire class. Otherwise, if there's something that's not quite adding up, he'll step in, make the correction, and try to help. We're presenting all the time, so those quests that we're doing in our free time, we are presenting to each other and working almost collaboratively to make quests better. The deadlines and quizzes, you want to?
Yeah, I mean, at some point I want, and this is true to workplace skills, we still have deadlines in the workplace. So for each layer, there is a deadline when I want to see your portfolio and that you've met those objectives. But students continue to add to it. So if a student runs out of time, one of the students said I can kind of pick when I do my work. If a student runs out of time, give me the base level stuff to get yourself a C, so I know you've met every row. But students throughout the rest of the course will continue to add things in to get their grade where they want it. So they can essentially up their grade to whatever they want by continuing to do it. And we don't walk away from content. We don't leave, we've used constructivism as an example in the ed psych class. We don't leave constructivism ever. It's part of our permanent discourse. So you can always use that language and tie it back into your quest, or at least that's the idea.
Yeah. So accepting redoing, it goes back to that choice. You have the whole grid. And then if a quest isn't, if Dr. Dikkers thinks you're kind of getting the point, but the language isn't within the paper you've written or the activity you've done, he'll hand it back to you and be like, can you add to this and make it more robust so that I know you're hitting all the points? And then, like you said, there's the repetition. We're constantly coming back to topics that we've already covered.
And the redoing piece for me as a prof is instead of grading, just do it right, which looks a lot more like the workplace. The goal isn't that you necessarily can you because you made a mistake or you get an F on something because it's wrong. The goal is to get it right. So let's develop that professional capacity in how we do things. So class periods. Generally speaking, a layer would be 5 to 8 class periods, which here at Bethel is 3 to 4 weeks per layer that we'd spend on things. The class is chunked out. Day one, as you can imagine, would be a kickoff for a new layer. And day one is largely students wanting me to shut up so they can read the quest cards and start making their choices. And that becomes kind of that first thing that they would do. The middle of it is kind of varied. What I try to do is have at least one kind of hands-on activity that goes with each of those theorists. So if we're learning about constructivism, we're going to do constructivism. And then we share quests, so people are talking, and we share quests and we try to mix that up. So some days I'll just have them turn to a neighbor, some days they'll do small groups, some days we'll do it as a large group, and we'll try to share what's going on that's fun. Is there a quest that you did that you really want to share? Sometimes when there's posters, people want to show their posters off, and that can be something we do there. When I do shorter lectures, I can have large chunks of those class periods to walk around the classroom and see what people are working on. Show me what you got, show me your quest for this, how are you doing? And then we can talk about those sorts of things. We can also do smaller seminars. So if I have a group of people doing a particular kind of quest and they're stuck on it or they don't get how to do it, I can meet with just that group of students while other people are getting other pieces done in the classroom. So it becomes more of, the hope is it becomes more like a newsroom than that traditional classroom we saw at the beginning of this talk. And last but not least, the end of a layer has to be kind of a bigger thing. And what I found is students really wanting time on that last day, not to frantically finish things up, but to organize, put polish on it, make sure there's kind of a consistent way to hand it in. And we just hand in a Google folder link. So they just send me a link, and then I've got all their quests laid out. So that kind of final polish, that piece, sharing the best from what you have, talking about kind of reflecting on the unit, connecting things to the field placement, having those conversations. So we try to leave a work day at the end of every layer where they just have time to do those kinds of things. And we can review for the test, and we try to do review that's a lot more corporate, so we can review together, and we mix that up every layer too. That's it for the overview. I want to say a few things. Thanks to the students that are here and the students that helped in the video, but also thanks to students that have been part of this design process with me for a long time. I don't think I'm not clever enough to invent a lot of these ideas. Most of these came from students that have helped me figure this out and just asking the right kinds of questions. If you want a more scholarly review of this, it was published 2 years ago now, because we're in 2018. Where we looked at these kind of iterative design process, where a class gets designed with its students each semester as you go through the class, and that class gets better and better every semester. Other pieces where we're looking at the use of Minecraft as another computer game that's out there, and one of the projects I did is I interviewed teachers from around the country that are using Minecraft as a quest or activity in their classroom. So just studying that, and there's a copy of that book up here for you. And then last but not least, there are other profs here at Bethel that are asking these same kinds of questions, and it's been an absolute joy to work with them. And I know on May 23rd, they're in the makerspace, they're kind of doing their West by Midwest thing, where they're talking about crazy, weird things that they try in the classroom, those wonderful failures that help us to become better educators. So thank you very much. Are there questions?
So that whole grid, you have come up with a separate assignment for each one of those blocks. And you do that for every unit?
But
That's my whole summer. I just said goodbye to
so
summer.
he came up with a couple of quests for each role within the first year. And then students came to him and said, hey, can I do this, and would this count as a quest, and here's how I'm going to relate it back to the class. And then it got added to the grid.
Nice. Can you make that bigger?
Yes, I can. The first year we did this, most quests were fit in this box. So to do what you're saying, and that's where this gets to be very intimidating, it can just be as simple as what we did on that counter. And the first couple of years I did this, it was just that simple. So here's the content I want you to learn, here's the piece, here's the theory or philosophy we need to study. So I need to find a way for you to show me that you've learned that. And then that's a discussion in the class, usually. But this is, again, after some time, let's just put that out there where we can all see these kinds of things. And then those quest cards were largely done last year as in, like, what's next? And what's next for me is to even add to those quest cards and take past students' work for exemplars, where they'd have 2, 3 totally different ways to do that quest that would be examples. But all of that just is iterative design, where it happens year after year. So, and then students don't do everything on here. So when they hand in a portfolio, they might do 1 from each row, so they do 5 assignments. Or they could do 2 or 3 from each row. If they like a row, they can try to do all of them because they really think this is going to be valuable for their future practice. So they can kind of build that way. But no, this did not start out looking like this. I filled in I think Daniel pretty much nailed it. I think the first year I taught the class, I had 2 or 3 options for each standard that we had to cover in the class. And initially I would just say, here's Bloom's taxonomy of learning. Bloom's sermon is, go to church this Sunday and try to show me where in the sermon the pastor uses each part of Bloom's taxonomy. And see if they get to higher levels of cognition or not. Or do they just stick to knowledge and understanding? So what they're doing is, that's the repetition. They're learning what we did in class, but they're finding things in the world where they can apply it. But for me as a prof, I won't say it's easy because it takes some time, but initially it was just, go listen to a sermon. Cool idea. Show me what you can come up with. I didn't write out huge rubrics or pages for that. That all comes to play when I'm doing that portfolio assessment.
I've even seen some scores get filled in like within a unit, added right in the middle of it.
Yeah. So our department has Illuminate talks in the evenings, so they can go to one of those talks, but this one doesn't have a quest card. It's just a sentence like, this would be, as a future educator, you should get to some of these talks. These are really, they're worth your time. And I think you'll easily be able to connect any of them back to these theories. So then that just gets added just like that. Initially, that was the whole card, was just things like that.
So can I just clarify, they have to do one for each of the objectives? But they, in essence, they're putting together how many points they need and what grade they want to get. Is that how that works?
Yeah. What I'll tell the students, and I try to back away from grades as much as I can, which is frustrating for some of the students. But what I'll tell them is generally if you're doing one per row, you will pass this class. If I can get one solid quest where I know you've got those that concept down pat, then I'll get you through the class. If you're doing 2 or more, we're talking B's and A's. So what does that look like? And some students really, maybe they don't like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They'll do their one here and say, check on that, but I really enjoy John Dewey and constructivism, and that's where I want to spend more time. So a lot of students, when you look at the patterns of how they do things, they'll do it that way. The other piece of this too is, at the end of a unit, I can have my TA heat map this, so I can see which ones are getting picked by students and which ones are not. And if I have a quest that nobody's picking, we can delete the quest, and that's where I get some of these gaps now. Is if nobody's picked the quest, then it's not a competitive activity. I need to get rid of it. So it forces me as a teacher to keep rethinking and redesigning. More questions? Yeah.
Maybe just from a practical standpoint, can you share an example of one standard or idea and then kind of the disparate ways that students took it?
Yeah, I can do that. Actually, do you want to do that?
So learning just the theorists.
Behaviorism.
Yeah, so we need to know Skinner, Thorndike, and Pavlov. So Dikkers creates the quest based on how are we going to learn these people and then what they did, what their theories are.
So some of the required readings are on the main syllabus, so there's one reading for all of those. But if you want to do additional readings, you can do Lee Cantor's Assertive Discipline, and which is reading an entire book that I wouldn't normally assign. But we can go a lot deeper if they're making the choices. Even with 7th graders on a particular layer, we would have them reading 3-4 books at a time. I can't assign that to all 7th graders, but some of my 7th graders, they're readers. They will dig in and do that kind of work, and God bless them. That's the kind of learning I want to have. I can have framing, where they're looking at a classroom and deconstructing it using these theories, so they have to use the language. They can watch, there's a series of TED Talks that talk about how to change people's behaviors through behaviorist strategies. They don't use the same language that we did in class, so students have to synthesize, and they have to do that kind of connection work. The marshmallow test, Dan Goleman's work with emotional intelligence. How long will that little kid wait to eat the marshmallow? We watch that in class as one of our activities, but then that's a quest. Go conduct that same experiment that these theorists conducted, see if you get the same results. And that for, I think, a lot of our students is like, maybe grad school would be interesting, because you get to go out and do that kind of research. Study guides, make it on paper for me. Give me a decent study. Remember, we're in teacher education. Make me a study guide for your future classroom where you're teaching Pavlov, Thorndike, and Skinner, and make a study guide for your classroom someday. Video lesson, I want you to teach me about Pavlov, Thorndike, and Skinner, and videotape and record it. That'd be good for your communication class. And then the waiver, the experimenter are 2 movies that are on Netflix, easily available, where they did extremely behaviorist research, and they can kind of watch those movies for fun. Again, I wouldn't take class time to watch movies, but if they want to binge quest on the weekend, get together in groups, or there's a townhouse full of people who want to do it. And I didn't invent that term, the students invented the term binge questing, because they could do that. So if I can lure them away from World of Warcraft to do educational psychology and just kind of do these things on the weekends, then that's kind of a win. So it's clearly more time invested in the class than students do, but students generally tell me it doesn't feel like work, which is an odd phenomenon to me. So I think that's kind of interesting. Does that help walking through it? None of these took a lot of time for me to design, but they're all just things in the world that we can do where you're playing with these ideas, not just waiting for the test.
Yeah, I mean, when I'm doing quests, I would tell you that it feels maybe like 4 hours in total, but there's a lot more time that goes into it. And since it's spread out and it's front-loaded, it's it doesn't seem like I'm spending an hour on each quest. It feels like a half hour, if that.
Any other questions?
So then you have a quiz for like on each of those theorists.
I'd do this as one huge test for the layer. And that's pretty,
This is just
pretty
one
traditional.
unit?
This would be one layer of the
That's
class.
that's one layer.
That's one layer. So for my ed psych class, there's 5 of these.
So each one of those little boxes, if I'm going across, has a point value. They're getting point value to up their grade. So if I fill in at least 2 of those all the way across, they're bumping up their grade.
But you have to hit one from each of the rows so
Right.
that you're hitting everything.
Right,
So-
but like, what's the point value to watching Netflix? They have to write a summary, to let you know they watched them?
Right. Well, they have those quest cards that we
Oh,
showed you.
okay.
So yeah, they have to show me in some way, shape, or form what they got out of what they did. Some things are. This is where one of the failures I had is I tried to assign value.
Yeah.
And that was that question, how do you assign value to things? It takes more time to watch a movie, but is that a cognitive load that's the same as conducting your own field test? And the answer is, of course, this time is one thing we can value, cognitive load is another thing we can value. Doing lots of quests, but doing them at a lower level, that can be valued, or taking one quest and just really knocking it out of the park. And I've had students come and say, I don't want to just do a page on this, I want to do a full research paper. Can I do that? And the answer is yes. If you want to invest that time and go for it, you can. But all I need as a prof is to confirm that you've got these ideas down.
But you've still done one from every other category.
Yeah. So that's, a lot of it is just working with students on where they want to go and how they want to do it. And that, for me, is where that class time had to be. I have to have more time to get to every student, every class as best as I can. I have to be able to go around the room so if students have a question or they need help, we have 10, 15 minutes per class where that can happen. Otherwise, students get frustrated because they got a question about a quest and they can't quite get to me or they can't get that time in. So that changes the class makeup just a little bit. Thanks for the questions. And I'll say one more time, it doesn't have to look like this the first time you do something like this. It can just look like that. Here's this assignment that I've always done. I just want to open the door that instead of writing the paper, maybe you want to write a movie or make a movie for me instead, which is really easy. The digital software to do that today is so easy. It's not what it was 15 years ago. Anybody can go in and videotape with their phone and do some of these things. And then we can talk about production quality and what that looks like and how to communicate in video settings, and written settings, and all those kinds of things too. So, if there are no other questions, I think we're close on time, right? All right, thank you so much for coming today.